Hey everybody, this is Brian Yellow, episode 29 of Origin Stories on Creativity. Jason Abbott returned and he stopped by to talk about Portcon. I want to go to Portland and go to this convention. I want to sit down at one of Jason Abbott's gaming tables and be a teddy bear. And one of his, you'll know what I'm talking about when you listen to this podcast. Very personable guy. He had a lot of great things to talk about. We ended up talking about Lovecraft and a little bit of Howard. And honestly, the guy could write a thesis, get a doctorate. And we talked a little bit about the subreddit. We talked about writing, and he's a great guy. And I'm going to let him handle it from here. Sir, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so incredibly well that words alone could not possibly describe the amazingness. How are you?
I'm very good. That's very eloquent. So I hear you had some disruption with Portcon. How did that work out with you?
Everything. Portcon.
So jealous.
Portcon is a relatively small convention compared to other more famous cons like say Dragon Con or Comic Con. It is kind of a one size fits all kind of tent that we hold up here in Maine, and we had a record attendance of, I believe, a little bit over 3,000 folks this year.
Nice.
For over the 4 days.
Entire the weekend? Oh wow, 3,000 only.
About 3,420. I might be a little bit wrong on the change.
That's fantastic. Well, in terms of you show up on Friday, how many people are there?
It really depends upon what part of the con that you want to go to. When I showed up, I'm part of the staff. This was my second year of staff, and my wife joined me. It was her first year, and it's kind of a one size fits all convention where there are lots of different geeky type things that are going on. There are things that appeal to different fandoms. You've got a lot of folks are very interested in the anime. Then you have the comic book folks, the movie folks, all kinds of genre. I'm specifically my crew, my batch is over in the role playing side.
Yeah,
I like all the
sides.
Yeah. I love going over to the RPG section, and I was game mastering. And I started going to Portcon about 5 years ago or so, and got involved, got to meet the folks there and meet that crew. And
do you think that it'll ever get up to the level of a New York City no, obviously not New York City Comic Con, but like an Emerald City Comic Con, or maybe even like a Denver City Comic Con or something like that?
We'd have to get a bigger place to hold it for once. The convention could certainly grow. We as of right now, where we hold it at the DoubleTree by Hilton, which is right next door to the main mall. We're at capacity. Theoretically, we've never hit a point where we have to turn people away because we have too many folks. But we've spilled out of the confines of the hotel itself. In fact, the game arena for the past 2 years has been set up over in a former extreme fitness space over in the main mall, which is just across the street. So they have that set up over there. That's actually been awesome because we've been able to put all the games over there, be they video games, board games, collectible card games like Magic the Gathering, and the role playing. All of those we're able to house over there, and it's in this old fitness center that they've taken all the fitness equipment out of, and we've repainted it and whatnot. It's a space that the mall can't. It's a hard space to sell, I would think.
Wow.
But we've been renting it for the time of the convention and going in there, and that's been a godsend because we've been able to move all those events out of the hotel over to the main mall and free up that space.
Is the con profitable? Does it make money? Or is that something that doesn't really happen? For any of these cons, I'm not even sure, are any of these profitable? Like even New York City Comic Con, do they make money?
I'm not involved with that, but I would have to say that yes. But I don't think that there's a lot of work that's put on there, and I'm not involved with the finance of it, so I have no expert opinion to relay on that. People volunteer. There is money that is in there to help keep the con going, but nobody gets a paycheck. For example,
it's a volunteer, right? You volunteer.
Well, I volunteer, you know, to be it, but I am by being a staff member, I get a free pass to go to the convention, so that saves me a little bit of money there. I also qualify as staff to have housing at the hotel.
Oh,
So
cool.
for the days of the event, so that's really that right there is awesome. I mean, I live about an hour's drive, so that saves me 2 hours a day driving back and
Oh,
forth
you
to
get
go
to
to the
sleep
convention.
late. You get to wake up, roll out of bed, put your costume on if you're doing the cosplay.
Exactly.
Go to the con. Yeah, that's cool. That's so fantastic.
And in exchange for that, I volunteer 16 hours of my convention time to doing things. And for me, that I game master games. I game master 4 hour games is what I did this year.
Oh, what do you play when you're there?
I have the last 2 years that I game mastered, I went with a very simple system called the 5x5.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it's a very small system. It's very easy to learn. There's a lot of the reason why I went with that system was because uh, very frequently you don't know what kind of folks are going to show up for your game. So
Uh-huh.
you could have a lot of experts that show up for the game, and you could have novice people or people who've never played a role-playing game before show up. So uh, you don't want to have a game system that is really complicated because you only have 4 hours, and you don't want to spend an hour or so telling people how the game works.
Hmm.
So the more simple of a system you have, the more better performance you'll have in that type of a situation. So 5x5 only uses two six-sided dice. You roll them,
Two,
multiply them
six,
together.
five. Wow. 5x5. That's so interesting. So what are you playing? Is it fantasy or is it sci-fi? What kind of game like world are you building?
Well, I try to do a mixture of the different games. So I had 4 games, and this year they were all individual. They used the same system, but they were different. Each one was its own independent game. There was no crossover or anything in amongst them. The first one I did say on Thursday night was Toys Against Darkness, and uh, using the 5x5 system, the general premise was that everybody was playing an animate teddy bear, and they were trying to protect
My
their
God.
children. They were trying to protect their children from an evil force, which turned out to be kind of a Lovecraftian enemy that was coming to stalk them. So the adventures were pretty much about them trying to find and prepare for this eventual
Does that
assault.
exist out in the world, or did you make that up from scratch?
There's another game called Nightlight, which gave me the initial idea. And
Nightlight.
Nightlight, it's a very minor. I don't think that they've actually have an official published version, but the Nightlight system is the concept is you play toys that are fighting the things that go bump in the night, which are real.
Okay.
And my friend Chris, who's a fellow game master, got me introduced to that system. He also game masters at
Is
Portcon.
this kid appropriate, or is it geared towards children, or is it more adult oriented?
It kind of depends upon how you would want to run it. This in this case, I like if I had kids playing, I might do things a little bit different. But I kind of ramped up the creepy as they were all adults. Most of my games I run at night, so I don't have a lot of the kid traffic.
Well, I don't know if
Um,
you know me well enough, but you say Lovecraft, I'm like, my mouth just salivates. I love it so much. I don't even know Lovecraft that much. I just love the concept of Lovecraft.
yeah, yeah. The end boss in this, there was a lot of as the everybody. I had a group of a pool of 10 different player characters that people could choose from, and they were all teddy bears of one sort or another. I had like
So
Big
cool. I
Bear.
love just
Yeah,
thinking about playing a teddy bear as a
yeah.
role-playing character. That fantastic. Let's get into the how many character 5
There were 10.
characters?
There was a pool of 10 characters, though the practical limit of people that I could fit at the table would be around 8, and I ended up having 5 people playing.
That's messy though, isn't it? When you're playing with 8 strangers role-playing,
Eight
right?
people, 8 people is tough. I've
Yeah.
never had a game. I've seen a few other RPGs that end up having 8 folks during the conventions, but when you don't know each other and you're all trying to get established, that can be really difficult. I think I've topped out at 5 or 6 people tops at any of my
Yeah,
games,
that's
which
a
is
little better
typical.
5. I would
Yeah.
say that's like the perfect number of strangers anyway.
Yeah, that's a good number to have. If you have only 3 folks, that's kind of a bare minimum to really run a game, and if you only have 2, it gets really, really hard.
2 plus the DM or the GM.
Yeah, 2 players is what I mean. So, but when I'm game mastering a group of like 5 folks, 6 folks, that's kind of an optimum kind of group size. When you get bigger, when you get 7 or 8 folks, it can take a long time to go around and get everybody's input as they play the game, and also it can be difficult to focus in and make sure that everybody is who wants to have an input and a focus in the game is doing so.
No, is this
Because
a character based where like you want to role play, or is it more kind of you roll the dice and you do your character mechanic and then you move on to the next person?
my style that I do when I game master is more character based. I try to give the players agency so that they can do whatever they want.
Okay.
Um, I try to guide them and give an overall tone to kind of put them in the right direction as to the way that I want the story to progress. But the whole point is that I kind of know what the overall plot is, and I know what my antagonists are doing, whether that be in the background or foreground.
Uh-huh.
But when people are playing, like, I think that it's paramount that they have choice and command in a role-playing game. That's my big challenge as an author,
Yeah.
because as a writer, I used to be a terrible game master, and I was a terrible game master because I wanted to be a writer, and I was trying to be a writer with a role-playing game. So I would create all these characters, and I'd create like a situation that had to play out just so. But that removes from the hands of the players.
You want to be in control of
Yeah,
everything. Yeah.
you're not here to just watch me talk for 2 hours and pantomime. You want to say, okay, my character is a fighter and he's going to do this.
No,
You
you're
need to
not.
have that action, and then you're like, no, 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 you can't do that. Or like I pull some jerk ass move, where like I negate like your character's ability to do that. The game master doesn't feel satisfied in a situation like that. The players don't feel satisfied in a situation like that, and it just is a bad scene.
Yeah.
This is stuff that I pulled back when I was in high school and when I was in my early 20s, and then I had a big break from actually playing RPGs. So when I made a return, I kind of realized by the time I got running these games a couple of years ago that those are my flaws. What I really wanted to do was write and tell stories, and that stuff is fine if you're writing fiction and you're putting down, you have to have a good command of what happens and you assemble it. And if you're writing creative fiction, whatever that may be, that's perfectly good, but not in interactive storytelling, because it's all about the group of people. I'm just one part of it that's focusing the story, but the story is only happening because of the people who are playing the game. I might be running it and I'm playing an important part because I'm the antagonist roles and trying to keep everything on track with some sort of story coming together. But
Yeah.
if the other folks aren't involved, they might as well not even be there, and
Yeah.
you
It's
can
like
just
playing
let the
racquetball versus tennis, basically.
exactly. So again, my major thing that I focus when I'm doing a game is to try to give agency to the players, and sometimes that can be that can be tricky in and of itself, because you have to give them enough so that they have some idea what it is they need to, what their goal. You have to give them some sort of a goal. You're always going to have people that are going to shoot off in a strange direction, but
Those are my favorite. That's me, actually.
and that can be fine, and that can actually open up things in the game that you never even thought were going to happen, and you got to improv and you got to roll with it. But if you just give folks like no guidance, like, okay, here you are and what do you do, that especially when you have limited amount of time for people to feel their way through, that can be a mistake. That actually happened in one of my games over this most recent con, where that was a bit of a disappointment. They found their goals eventually, but there was a lot of just kind of dead time, that was really critically problematic in a time session where you only have 4 hours to do
And not the weekend coming up to fix it.
Exactly. It's totally different when you're, say, meeting weekly or bi-weekly to do a continuing adventure, or like you're playing for 6 hours or an evening or whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm. So we have 4-hour sessions every single day of the con, or was that just on one specific day that you're working as a game master?
This year I broke it up. I had one every evening from 6 to 10. And then the last one was 1 to 5 on the Sunday because they're not open on Sunday night. They wrap up at 5 in the afternoon.
Okay. What kind of panels were they running? But anything for authors? Because I mean, New York City Comic Con does do the writing panels, and when I have the opportunity to go, that's what I aim for.
Yep,
Especially
there's a large number of panels and events and all kinds of and meet and greets that go on with the convention. It's not a primarily focused writers convention. However, this year there was a writers panel that was on Friday that I went to and I enjoyed very much. That was put on it was called So You Want to Be an Author. And they had a really nice batch of authors who have been doing stuff for a long time on that. And I sat down and listened to it. And they kind of gave like here's an author one-on-one 101 kind of a situation. And they really knew what they were talking about because I didn't get from that portion of the panel, I really didn't get very much, but they really did know their stuff because this is all stuff as a moderator on Fantasy Writers that is advice that we give out all the time to folks.
Like what would that advice be?
Well, the idea of putting out your work for critique and how important critique is, and listening to the critique that comes your way, that's like an extremely important thing. That a lot of people just write it and they don't do any drafting process, or the only people that they ask critiquing for are like friends and family members that aren't authors. So whereas these three guys from the Quantum Muse e-zine, they were really good. They said like you definitely have to, like, if you're interested in publishing and all this other stuff, you need to get feedback. You need to either pay for a professional editor or have like a large group of critique
you know how
partners.
much a professional editor is?
Oh, tons of money, tons.
Yeah.
In fact, that was
the realm of possibility money. Honestly, it's real expensive.
Authors, if you don't have that kind of support system of a group of critique partners, it's prohibitive to get a hold of an editor. Now, what was actually one of my questions for these guys, because the panel, once it finished up, they did have a question and answer, but it was virtually out of time. It only had an hour slot. Mm-hmm. So it was obviously these guys had decades of experience, and they had put out their own stuff, and they focused in on the good advice that if you're going to write, don't write what you think is going to be popular, write what you really want to write and what you think is cool, and to put your work into honing your craft, because you're going to have to love it to stick with it. These are all things that you've heard me espouse multiple times. Mm-hmm. But afterwards, I kind of shook their hands and met them back over at their authors table where they were trying to sell their books for the convention. And they were all really nice. And I kind of asked them some 202 questions that were really specific to the work that I was doing. For example, that whole idea about, you read all the time. You got to, if you read blogs or you go to YouTube and watch writers, they pound into you a great deal of the thing. You got to get an editor. You gotta do this. And I really didn't think that was necessary in my case, because I've got almost a dozen friends that are writers and critique partners, and a lot of them are pretty brutally honest with me if they think that I've written a piece of poo that I'm putting my work through. And I said, if you put it through a number of critique partners who are doing editing and who disagree with you and aren't just saying, yes, this is great, does almost a dozen critique partners equal an editor in your experience, in your 20, 30 years of experience? And combined, they had like 50, 60 years of experience. And they said, absolutely, yes. Particularly, if you're starting off, and you don't have the bank to get a hold of like a big name author, even if you could get them to take a look at your work. Yeah. To do that's that's a realistic option to go for. It's not an option for everybody, but in my situation it is. I have a number of friends that I've made that are writers, and they're able to, if I say, hey, can you critique a few chapters for me, and if you need anything, come back in touch with me. And so
I
barter
wonder,
system.
yeah, the barter system. I wonder if are we aiming to be Brandon Sandersons, or are we aiming to be something else? I wonder what the future is going to be for people like us who are content creators, who write short fiction and novels, who do these things on the internet that didn't exist 15 years ago, that didn't exist 10 years ago for that matter. YouTube, this big invention, this Twitter, this Facebook, I don't like to even say the word Facebook, but you know, these things that did not exist that now are this modern monolith. I mean, they're gigantic, that these authors at this table 60 years ago didn't have to contend with, that they still don't contend with, that they're, you know, when you look at their Twitter, all they do is every single day they pump this tweet that has a picture of their novel over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Is that, you know what I mean? You know what I mean, because you see
Oh, of
them.
course. Yeah, I see it all the time. And that's like whenever you do stuff like that, I actually had to deal with getting caught back up on social media after the last month.
I see what you're doing too. I really appreciate those tweets that you're putting out, the micro 240 character, 140 character stories that you're doing. I really appreciate those.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
tagged on to one of them once. I was like, oh, I'm going to write a second part to this. And I'm like, oh, that was rude. That's not what he's trying for here.
I wouldn't be upset if you did it.
Okay, well then I'll do it then.
If the fans invite you, feel free. You wouldn't be the first person who's written a retort. In fact, you did that with something I posted on Reddit a few months ago with the ogre sweat potion thing that you wrote a little retort to that, which I thought actually really enjoyed quite a bit.
I can do that to everything, man. I'm very rude. So I always have these like, oh, I could do that. No, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. X out, X out, X out.
Pardon me. Just 1 second.
Sure.
Just needed to mooch it so I didn't cough in your ear. Yeah, I've seen that very often on Twitter. Is really guilty of that, where a lot of authors set it up and then it's kind of on autopilot. Sometimes it's like literally on autopilot, where they have paid to have a service that automatically does things. Like I've seen some authors that have a blog, and you can't see my air quotes, but maybe you could put them in on your.
No, I got you.
I've seen blogs that authors have just gone through and they've done like say 100 different blogs, and then they recycle them, and so they have a bot that's go through, and then so like they repost the same blogs year to year to year. And it just kind of goes, it'll be doing that ad infinitum. I don't know whether they're doing that manually or whatnot, but then they also have a Twitter bot which retweets whatever they've posted on the blog. There's no like actual like you don't interact with them. Like if you said, hey, how's it going? They'll never reply back.
No response, yeah.
And this is true, and this is more true on Twitter when it comes to accounts that if you see somebody who's following like 100,000 people or 1.3 million people, it's a robot that's running that. There's nobody in the world who is following 100,000 people. There's not even anybody who's following 1,000 people, because if you follow 1,000 people, you can't really understand what's going on. It's fake. Like if you look at somebody like Stephen King, I think on Stephen King's Twitter account, he's following like 12 people, maybe 25 people. And the same like G.R.R. Martin is about the same. These are people he's actually following. I'm like, you know what? I respect that, because it's not like who legitimately is following 1,000 people. So like if I was actually followed by say Stephen King, I'd be like, wow. Well, first I'd have to go and clean my pants out. And then I'd have to, and then I'd of course refollow him. But I'd say, wow, Stephen King is actually following me and talking about Stranger Things. So
when I talked to Dirk Ashton, he was like the first podcast I did, and we had this conversation about following, not following. There's two camps. You follow whoever's following you, and I started doing that basically. And I've got 2,000 people I follow versus 900 that follow me. And my feed is just unreadable. There's so many people on there that I have no clue who they are. And, I interact with some of them. Some of them show up here and there again and again and again. But, it's impossible to develop relationships with the majority of them.
Yeah, so I did that when I first got on Twitter about a year ago, and I had a lot of people, and then I did some reading and some real thinking about it. It's like I'm kind of being false by following somebody and not really paying any attention to them, and in return, there's lots of people who follow me and never interact with me. The people that I follow tend to be people that I know and that I enjoy their work, and that interact with me. So like if I say, hey, how you doing? We can have a conversation. And so those are the people that I follow. I'm not being cold-hearted about anything, but there are lots of robots on there. Like I got followed, like here's an example. A week or so ago, somebody followed me and they were the voice of Siri, on the iPhones.
Uh-huh.
And they're following like 1.3 million people. It's like, gee, you follow me. I feel so special amongst those other 1.3 million people that you follow, and then they follow you and I don't follow back. And then the bot that's controlling their Twitter account realizes they haven't got a reciprocal follow within that period of days, and then they drop you. And so
or they start following you again immediately after they drop you, so that they can get a response from you.
Yes, exactly.
Or you follow them and they send you a DM that's like a page long telling you to follow them on Facebook or this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, and a lot of those accounts, if you do follow them, the only thing that shows up in the feeds are like ads for their book or something like that. And who wants to really follow something just to get spam? Because that's really, if all you're talking about is like, hey, my new book is out. Yes, I got that. You post this 2 or 3 times a day to check out your book.
But ultimately my point is, though, what are we creating? Something to be edited or something to engage with? Are we creating something for people to buy? Because ultimately, I download Scalzi's book for free, or I download this person's content for free. No money's coming out of my checking account ever for any of this content.
Mm-hmm.
Even for, I'm paying Optimum, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know at the end of the day, in 10 years, what the world is going to look like for people like us, content creators. And I ask everybody this question, and maybe there's no legitimate answer. Maybe the world isn't, I'm borrowing from you, he's borrowing from me. Maybe there is a more civil response to it. We should all be giving each other money or something.
Bless you. Well, I think the answer to that,
into your ear.
That's fine. I think the answer to that question ultimately lies, that not everybody has the money to give. I know I have gone through hard times. I still have hard times going on where I don't have a lot of money in my pocket to give out. And when I spend my hard-earned dollar on something, it's something that I really want to have.
What are you spending your hard-earned dollar on?
Like if I have the money to spend, after bills and after Vinny, who keeps calling my phone at midnight and saying he's going to break my thumbs if I don't pay off my debts. If I'm able to avoid Vinny for a little while on that and still maintain a little bit of cash, I like to support other authors that I know. These days, because my writing is not pulling in any cash at this point. I'm in the building a foundation point. So I don't have a lot of money to spend, just like most other authors. So when I was at Portcon, I picked up a good book by Melissa Walsh, who I've only been able to very vaguely begin getting into because I've been so busy. But it's called Autumn's Daughter. She's a local Maine author, and she was there. She had a table and was selling her book, and we had a nice 15-minute conversation about what was going on with that. And and I talked to her after the con about her experience there. That gave me some good ideas as to what I want to do once my book Vivian's Last Cigarette is out. So that was
what ideas did she give you?
And specifically, I was talking about how her table went and how her experience with the con was. Like, would you do it again? Do you feel like you at least broke even with it, etc. So
all these questions. I want to know how much a table would be at Portcon.
there's a set value. I don't want to discuss the information that she shared with me in confidence.
No, that's fine. Let's
So,
cover how much a table at Portcon is.
uh, you know what? My book wasn't ready, so I didn't look into it this year. But I think it's probably $100 or
$100
something.
for the
Let's
weekend
just
or for just a day?
I think you buy for the whole event. So you put down the money on there. And to surmise, what Melissa was able to tell me was that she did much better than break even on it, and it was worthwhile, and she got to network with a lot of people.
That's very interesting to
Yeah.
spend $100 to stand behind a table, to make eye contact with people, to engage with them about something that you're really passionate about.
Well, no, she
I'm
was
a
selling her
writer.
books.
Yeah,
She was selling. She had 2 books that were on there, and she has a third one, the end of her trilogy, on the way.
interesting.
So like she had those out for like you could get the first book for $15, which is what I did. And that was actually really very useful to me, because she printed her books with CreateSpace, which is
Okay.
CreateSpace is a self-publishing subdivision of Amazon, where it's printing on demand, which is how
That's
I
where I
wanted
have
to do
mine
it.
at, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I had not had the opportunity to actually examine a book that was printed on CreateSpace. So by able to physically get a hold of a book and take a look and go, wow, this is a really nice quality softcover book.
I haven't bought
Regardless,
mine. It's like $15, and I think I can get it for less than that, actually, if I reprice it.
as far as like, I guess I don't understand that last comment.
Oh, I'm saying that I have it priced at $14.99. I'm not sure if that's the lowest amount that I can price it at, or if I could price it even lower than that.
I think that's probably fairly standard, because Melissa was selling her book for also $15, so
Oh, really?
effectively the
Okay.
same price.
I
I
think I
think.
tried as low as I can get, because my Kindle price is $2.99, and I think that was the lowest I could make it at too.
Yeah. But for me, just being able to physically examine something, because you never quite know until you get, excuse me, you never quite know until you actually can see the product hands-on. And I was very impressed with the quality. That looked as good as any softcover book that I would see produced by a big name publisher.
Well, that's good to know. Did she do
Yeah.
her own cover, or did she outsource that?
Her husband actually did the cover art, and he
Oh,
was a very nice guy to talk to. I sat down, and I have the copies of Vivian's Last Cigarette's cover that I've gotten completed, but I haven't released publicly yet. But on an author favor, like I had him take a look at it, and spread around the artist's name that I worked with, and it was it was cool, because like he had designed a really good cover that really caught the eye, and it was really nice.
Would you mind if I take a look at the cover? I'm really curious.
I would be more than happy to send a copy your way, but I
Oh, I
would
meant
not.
like, can I look up her website? I'll even put it in the show notes.
Oh, you're looking for Melissa's website. Yeah,
Yes. Oh,
if you type in Melissa Walsh,
Walsh.
WALSH, WALSHE,
That's
Melissa
how well I
Walsh.
pay attention. You said it like 3 times, and I was not.
It's melissawalsh.com is her site.
I can spell really well. .com.
And yeah, she's got it up on Amazon, and it's called Autumn's Daughter, is the first book in the 3-part trilogy.
She's from Toronto?
No, she's from Maine, born and raised.
Oh, okay.
And if you're looking at her site, if you go to books and then type in, and then there's one for Autumn's Daughter, and the cover's right there.
It's so funny, when I try to do this stuff on the fly, I always misspell the simplest things, like Melissa, which is also my cousin's name. Melissa.
It doesn't
Walsh.
it doesn't help that some people spell it differently, etc.
Shoot me a link if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because I'm not pulling it up at all.
You got your Twitter open?
I do.
Just one moment.
No problem at all. So it sounds like Portcon is an amazing time with very little competition. New York City Comic-Con is a madhouse from the time it opens till the time it closes. This year, I've been promised that I can go on Sunday, and that's when all of the authors and all the writing panels are. And they're a little bit less competition to get into, and they have some really cool ones like comic writing panels and indie writing panels, and they're just really cool to get into and listen to, you know, writing and whatnot. But man, they have some big names that pop through. I saw Stan Lee one year.
That must have been
really fantastic.
That must have been a trip. Poor Stanley, though. His wife passed away.
No.
Poor, married
90,
69 years.
No.
Poor guy.
Yeah. Okay, so this must be a message from you.
Yeah, I just sent you the link right to her book page.
And I was spelling everything wrong. Oh, see, I like this type of cover. It's very, very impactful and very, very simple as well.
Yeah, it's simple. It's really striking. It pulls in your eye.
Yeah.
When that was going through, and it was really something else.
I'm in development right now with one of my friends from England. We're going to be doing a speculative fiction podcast like once a month or so. And she's got a novel called Pandora. I'm always really bad with names, but it's something similar to this. It's very, you know, flat, but it's striking. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Something else I want to develop too. I'd love to get somebody who's into Star Trek and do a Star Trek a Discovery podcast, like every episode.
Mm-hmm.
I can't find anybody who's into Star Trek though. I'm actually really annoyed with CBS, their whole online thing they're doing.
The new series that's coming out. I heard the other day that Jonathan Frakes is going to be directing at least a few episodes,
that's fantastic.
Which is cool because he always did a lot of really good episodes.
He's a really good director.
He's a very good director. He started. Of course, he's more well known as Commander Riker, but behind the camera, he's done a lot of really good work. I really enjoy Jonathan Frakes directing.
He did First Contact. He's done a lot of TV work directing wise over the years. And I'm kind of happy that he's not been an actor, kind of given that up, been behind the camera for decades now.
Well, he's following what he likes to do. And I'm sure that with all of the exposure he had, he was able to do all the acting that he wanted back on next year. And he did a lot of voice work. You can't forget that he was in the Gargoyles animated series.
I did not know that.
He was in the voice. He was the voice of Xanatos. So I don't know if you were familiar with that particular cartoon from the early 90s, but
I always catch things in hindsight.
Jonathan Frakes did the voice of the main villain, Xanatos, in there. And in addition, he brought in a lot of other Star Trek alum to go in there and do voice work. There was Michael Dorn in there who voiced a role. Marina Spirits, I can't remember. I'm probably butchering the name, but she played Counselor Troy. She was in there. She played a major recurring villain. The guy who played Data was in there. The name
Brent Spiner. Brent, one of my favorites.
How could I forget Brent?
Right, he's one of my favorites. I love Data.
Brent was in there, and he did the voice of Puck, and just was such a wildly different character than Data. That really.
Did you happen to catch? He had a YouTube series for a little while. I think it went away, but he played himself trying to make it in Hollywood, not being Data. It was really good. I enjoyed it. I don't think they did any more than 2 series or 2 seasons. If you hadn't seen it, I recommend it. He does, he plays the dickish actor trying to make it work.
I'll have to look that up. No, I have not heard of that.
Michael Dorn, though, makes me sad. He seems to be one of those actors that wants more out of life and just can't seem to make it past Commander Worf.
Yeah, he's kind of got that stuck in a role kind of a thing going on. I mean, it was kind of cool when he was on Heroes along with George Takei was of course on Heroes as well back when the series was the first season when it was good, and then there was the second season. George
Takei just makes it work for himself.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, he's just cool. Yeah,
he's the guy who just gets cooler the older he gets.
And William Shatner kind of does that for me too. He's just the older he gets, the more the more curmudgeon he gets, honestly, which is
Mhm.
fine. I don't even mind. I've pissed him off on Twitter before. I've said some stuff. He was witness to a rocket launch. I think it was one of either Amazon's or what's his name? The billionaire alien from another galaxy guy. He owns the electric cars. His name is escaping me completely.
I know who you're talking about. It's escaping me too.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he was witness to one of those launches, and he says the rocket is up and gone. And I said something along the lines of, "Is that a euphemism?" And he wrote back and said, "Is your mind on vacation?" And I responded with, "Oh my God, William Shatner responded to me." I was high on that for like a week. It's like William Shatner yelled at me.
Uh, but yeah, that's some exciting stuff that's coming up. So
Are you excited for Discovery?
I don't have cable, and I'm
Well, it's not gonna be on
unwilling to.
cable. It's gonna be completely internet.
Yeah, but you're gonna have to pay for the exclusive
Yes,
CBS
and that's what I'm
subscription.
mad about.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, yeah, you know what? I pay for Netflix already. You know, I could be paying for YouTube Red, but I don't. You know, there are so many other things that provide broader amounts of content. You know, and you know and the amount of time that I actually spend these days watching movies and televisions is greatly abridged.
Abridged, yeah, mine too. I mean, I have like an hour when my wife gets home. We watch a show and then I go to bed.
Yeah, I get home from work and have dinner, and I watch some YouTube with my wonderful wife, and then I wrap it up. I do my evening stuff, and then I come up and write for 2 to 3 hours.
Oh,
Um,
really? I'm in the
so
morning. I wake up at 2. I write for 3 hours, kick my
yeah,
family out of the house, and then I got to tell you, this podcast was supposed to be, I'll do a podcast, but nope, it takes up so much time.
yeah, yeah. The social media stuff, to touch back on that subject, is something that, you know, I don't think I fully answered your question as to where we're going as content
Yes.
creators. And the social
I mean, just
media.
to go back into it, I mean, in terms of editing and spending an outrageous fortune of thousands of dollars on somebody to look through your stuff and to
Mhm,
fix your commas,
mhm.
I mean, it's just like if you're entertaining somebody with the comma misplaced, why does it matter?
It You know, the whole idea of having an editor is to have a professional, not obligated to be nice to you eye that knows what they're talking about, to go through and you know, make your work consistent, and to make your work like to a higher level of quality, um, by highlighting problems with it. I get all of that from my critique partners, and we're all in the same boat. I don't have any critique partners which are big name, you know, authors by any measure, but we're all working hard and we're all trying, and I've all seen the quality of my critique partners' work. So getting feedback and information from them, you know, is very worthwhile to me. So so like sometimes, like, and a major question I had is like, is it worth the investment of an editor after all of that? I've got almost a dozen people that are helping me out, and I'm working hard and revising the manuscript every time, you know, trying to get everything uh, catered to get it to that level of quality. Is paying several $1,000s or more to some mysterious editor going to magically make it better? I think that if you were in a situation where you did not have a good pool of critique partners, that might be your recourse. Um, I think that when you're dealing with publishers, that publishers have on-staff editors that are going to work with you, and
Yeah.
that's provided by the publisher. But that's a whole different world, than
Just
the
don't know
self-published
how
author.
viable publishers are going to be going forward either. And in terms of having critique partners with me personally, I'm so selfish. I don't know if I can read. I don't know if I can read anybody else's stuff. Unfortunately, I can't do it. I have such a hard time finding time to fit it in. You know what I mean?
Networking is important. I mean, and it's
Yes.
always been important. Just today on Reddit, I was poking around, and on like an obscure subreddit, somebody was relaying how they had discovered this heretofore unknown conversation between H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, the guy who wrote the Conan stories, is what he's most well
Mm,
known for. And it was a brief. They had to piece it together from different sources, because there's a letter that's in the Howard collection that says, oh, and he and Lovecraft had an enormous conversation which went almost a decade. And in going through that conversation, there's one letter where Howard's like, oh, hey, by the way, I just submitted this story to Exciting Sports Stories. I'm making that up. But I can't remember the name of it, but I submitted such and such boxing story to Exciting Sports Stories. And if you could put in a word with me with the editor so-and-so about that, that would really help me to get that published. And then there's a reply back, from HP, and HP says, oh yeah, sure. I sent that letter off to them, and I said that you'd be a good thing. And then there's another letter that he collected from a completely different collection to Clark Ashton, who was, I might be butchering the name, but he was a contemporary and was very big after Lovecraft's death of spreading his mythos. And he said, oh yeah, I dropped that line to so-and-so, and HP's like, yeah, could you tell your other friends to recommend, that Howard's a good guy to go with. And it was remarkable because it's networking. It's just like what we do today, and it's hard. We do it with different tools and different technologies, but they had to do the same thing back then to network, to get their work out, and to get it published, putting in good words for one another, thanking each other for the help. Howard would send his stories. He would send pages and pages of stories over to HP, and HP would critique them and mail them back. This is much slower pace than what we have with the internet today, and of course typing them up or handwriting them, of course. But his work, but Howard's work improved after speaking with Lovecraft. He actually sat down and listened. And of course, an important thing about Howard is that he didn't go to school to get a degree in literature or English or anything like that. He had he never completed college, and wasn't really focused in a literary. He wanted to do more of a literary thing, but couldn't. So there's definitely that. I mean, Howard wrote the Conan stories after he started talking with HP and getting ideas and exchanging voluminous correspondence with him.
Am I wrong though? Did Howard die young?
He committed suicide. He committed suicide, and I think
his mom died, right? But he was a very young man. He was in his 40s.
30s. I think he was.
Wow.
I think he was 30 years old.
And Lovecraft died as an old man.
He was middle-aged. I think he was in his mid 40s or late 40s. I'd have to check.
Tuberculosis or some horrible disease of some
sort.
He had
cancer of the small intestine.
Okay.
So he was 46 when he died. He
46.
He died in 1937. And Howard, it looks like Howard, the date, he was 30 years old when he committed suicide in 1936. So they died.
So they died right on top of each other. So they had like a mentor-mentee type situation going on.
At the time, Howard was really he read a story by HP that he was really impressed by, and so he wrote a letter to the editor praising the story, and the editor forwarded it along to Lovecraft, and Lovecraft then got in touch with Howard because he wrote a very warm, hey, thank you very much for your feedback, and that started them talking back and forth. Now, Lovecraft had a huge circle of people that he corresponded with, and that's kind of why you see that after his death, his mythos took off, because a lot of his ideas, which he was happy to share with all the people that he knew, and he would be happy to critique and give his thoughts on things, and he just wrote volumes of letters. And so HP was, putting out and was fairly well known, and then Howard really listened to Lovecraft, and his work improved, and he struck on the character of Conan, and basically invented the sword and sorcery genre by pushing the Conan stories, and became an extremely successful author. In fact, he was like the best paid writer of the time at the time of his death in the United States. He made a living at it, and though he didn't get any novels published in his lifetime, Howard was very, very successful for a pulp author, but he wrote a lot of stuff under pen names and other stuff
Howard did, or Lovecraft.
Lovecraft, I don't know if he had any pen names or not. I don't think that he did, but Lovecraft wrote his own weird fiction and put that out there very close to.
It's crazy to me to think you're 36 years old and you have such a powerful literary career.
Yeah, well, at the time though,
and you're so powerful that you start a genre. You start a genre. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Well, H.P. Lovecraft was building off of blocks that were placed there by guys before him. I mean, he built off of Poe, and
I'm speaking specifically of Howard, though. I mean, the dude is 36 years old. He's uneducated, and this speaks volumes of what it. You know, you're basically you're ignorant of everything that's come before you, but you've got something in your soul. You've got these words. You've got this character, and you pound it out on a typewriter. You're creating something from nothing. I mean, you're basically just, I want to write whatever, and you pound it out. His prose is punchy. I mean, his prose is poetry.
He could write when it came down to action and hard-boiled kind of an outlook on that, Robert E. was definitely, that was forte. And he was only 30 when he died. When he came up with Conan, he was in his 20s. I mean, he started having success when he was about 23 years old. That was when he first started getting real money from publishing, and he only lived 7 more years after that. So in that period of 7 years, he came up with Conan the Barbarian and all of those stories. But there's so much other material that he wrote that's just pulp action type stories that are out there, like westerns.
What I think, though, is honestly, it speaks of writing to write, and you can't do what he did if you don't write. If you sit there and you fantasize about being a writer and you don't put the words on paper, you're never going to achieve what he achieved.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If he wanted to write Conan the Barbarian and he never wrote Conan the Barbarian, he was never going to put those words on paper in the order that he did.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta write. If you're gonna be a writer's right. You're not gonna write a story by thinking about a story. You have to get out there and actually do it. I mean, and that's a lesson that I had to learn when I went through 20 years of the world building dungeon where I was just.
I use that as an example all the time to people. Yeah. I mean, it's just like you are the writer you are because of that, though. I mean, you created these worlds and you use them every day, whether you know it or not. I mean, you're writing within those worlds. You're writing the characters that lived in those worlds. You are the person that you are because of that. That you are the writer you are because of the game master you were in high school, too. The creative person that writes the stories that you're writing or the novel that you're writing is that person.
Yeah, absolutely. You are what you write. I mean, they say write what you know, but sometimes it's not literal like that. Sometimes you're writing what you feel, or writing what you wanted to be and to happen. But ultimately you do have to write. I mean, it's not just the sum of my experiences that fuel the things that I put together and put out there on the page. I have to work on the craft of writing and what I want to do that. And you're only going to do that by first writing it. And then what's really important, unless like your writing's going to exist solely for your own designs and pleasures, you got to share it. Sharing those drafts and getting feedback and listening to the feedback. Critical. That I never had so much development than when I started sharing my work with other people. And for a long time, I was really terrified to share my work. And that's a new author thing. You're really, really shy about sharing your baby because, I think there's a psychological level there that that there's probably problems with it, but you feel that it's so good, and albeit you have put in a tremendous amount of effort just to complete this work. It's hard. And then you're putting it out there and you've got no armor, no defense, whatever. Your soul is on the page. And to feel criticism, to get criticism on that, it goes right past any defense you have, and boom, it's right there. It's one of the more difficult things to learn, and it's a very meta kind of thing to learn as a writer, to accept, criticism and to accept critique. People aren't there to hurt you. If you listen to people, if you've chosen people to review you, critique partners that understand, they are going to they're trying to help you and try to help your writing make better. Of course, you're going to get some things that are matters of style. This happens all the time with my critique partners, where one will be like, well, I wouldn't write it this way, but I might write it this way, and I'll say that's fine, but I'm going to keep it this way. And I don't do it in a mean thing like, you don't know what you're talking about. They didn't do it in a mean way to me. But I might say, you know what, I'm writing this because I think it sounds cooler that way, or the way that the character says this is very odd to me. And I'm like, yeah, but I understand that this is the character a little bit more. So this is kind of their way of the speech. So they're saying things a little bit, maybe it could be said more succinctly, but they're saying it a long way because they're an old fogey, professor. And so they're using some extra verbiage that isn't really necessary, but I'm putting it in there because it's part of their character. And those
the way I look at I could look at critiquers as people with really bright flashlights, shining a light on things that you might not necessarily be able to see.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's really, really important, because not only that, when they shine their light on something that you can't see, you'll be able to see it better next time.
Yeah, exactly. That's 100% accurate, because when somebody's putting that flashlight on there, it's like, oh man, yeah, that's a really good point.
And not only is it a good point, but I've been doing that for years, and I'm going to stop doing that because it's embarrassing that you mentioned it.
Yeah, exactly. Carolyn Lure, you interviewed her earlier on one of your prior podcasts. Carolyn was one of the first critique partners that I have, and she's great.
Yeah, she's brutal too.
She says it just like it is.
Yeah.
And that's what you need. She's one of those friends, and I count her as a friend. She's definitely one of those friends that will tell you exactly what it is, and she's not going to try to spare your feelings, because it's better to be honest with somebody, and that's the mark of a real friend.
I would love for her to read more of my stuff, but I'm afraid to ask her to.
If she's got the time, I'm sure that she would be willing to work with you a little bit. She's working into being more available for that kind of stuff, but there's still a lot going on with her life. But to get back to my experience with Carolyn, she pointed out to me, in some of my earlier works, I use the word said a lot, and there's a lot of debate about said. So and so said. Where there's a brand of philosophy where when the said tag is invisible, and you should always use the word said if you can, because it's basic and straightforward. And working
John Scalzi in Red Shirts, he said, screw everything, I'm just going to write he said, she said all the way through the novel, and I'm not going to even try and vary it, because that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't read that one, actually.
Oh, it's a really good novel, and Will Wheaton did the audiobook, so either or.
Yeah, the audio, that if Will Wheaton's doing the audio book, that must be a riot. But she got me thinking about the ideas, you don't always have to say said, because I was writing a lot of sentences that opened up with a bit of action where it's very clear that character X is doing something, character X put on their shirt, and then dialogue, and then they said, or he said, or she said. And she's like, you know what, you really don't need the said. I mean, you can just cut that off. And she went through and she took examples and just redlined all the saids and said, your action makes it really super clear that you don't need the said at the end of it. And I'm like, damn it, you're right. And so the way, I mean, said is a nice short way to remove any confusion as to who the dialogue is from, and that's the whole point of a dialogue tag. But you'll find that in my work, I don't use said a great deal. Now, I haven't completely banished it from my writing completely, because sometimes I just want to throw in a straight line of text, and by throwing a said at the end of it, that's the easiest way to make sure that the reader doesn't have any confusion about who is speaking. But other than that, I'm usually using some action in front of the dialogue, and it makes it really clear who's talking. So that's a trick that I totally, that's something that I would not have started doing, and it's now become something that's very prevalent in my work because of a critique partner.
There you go.
So,
and from now on, you'll be very cognizant of dialogue. Dialogue, in a way, is kind of cheap anyway, because if you have enough action, dialogue is unimportant. In fact, with the right kind of action, You don't need your characters to tell the audience anything because it's being shown to them, which in written prose is the best prose. Shown, not told.
It's much better to have a few really good words rather than a whole paragraph of description.
I write in description.
So do I. Don't get me wrong. I love writing description. But I've had to learn that through my journey, my personal writing journey, what I've learned is that the most effective way is to say the most that you can in the smallest amount of words when it comes to description, because it can kind of become a trap. Because when you start trying to describe something exactly as you have in your mind, the reality is that you're never going to you could use 1,000 words to describe a room, down to the smallest detail, and people still wouldn't get it. And on top of that, nobody's going to want to read it.
That's the point. I mean, if you're going to spend 1,000 words to describe a room and your reader puts the book down after 3, it doesn't matter how many words you use to describe the room because your reader left.
Yeah.
Put the book down. You got a reader. Your book is going to mold and fall apart. And
exactly. and you know what? And the same. Now, 1,000 words is obviously an outrageous exaggeration, but
I can spend 1,000 words describing a room, but
easily.
Like I said, the readers put the story down a long time ago, and you're basically talking to yourself.
Yeah, you can do it, but the thing is, like, if you trim it down, like spending a paragraph or 2 to describe a room, still, because readers will get that, and then they'll start reading about this room, and it's like, okay,
what's
it's a room.
The point of the room? Why is the room important?
And
what
the room,
your character? Let's truncate this. The room is important. Why?
Yeah,
what's important about the room?
Absolutely, and the room may very well, the description, every line of that may be pertinent to what's going to come up. But if they get bored and they put down the book, then where are you?
Yeah.
So what I've learned is to truncate that and just say, if I can say it in a half a paragraph, great. That's my aim. And I've usually, and that's come from me, like working with critique partners, and they say, this really goes on really long, Jason, you got to cut some of this. And I'm like, okay. And
one of the best things I ever learned was, how late can you start? What's the latest thing you can, what's the latest moment that you can get there with, when can you start the latest? Cut. Okay, now I start. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I love it. Screenplay writing, you don't want to sit the camera. What's so interesting to me? I listened to a podcast with Edgar Wright just recently, and he was talking about one of his films that he did earlier in his career. I guess it was after Spaced, honestly. The Spaced, the sitcom he did with, oh man, I can't remember his name. His duo, who he does all his movies with. Spaced, right? His sitcom.
You know what? I'm not familiar with Spaced.
Oh, you've got a treat. You need to type in Spaced. It's not on it's not on Netflix, though, unfortunately. It's not anywhere. You have to find it. But anyway, he did a Western, and he said when he did his long cut, meaning he put every single scene in without edits, it was like 74 minutes or something. It was ridiculously short, which means that every single scene from beginning to end without any edits at all, it was only 74 minutes. But if he did Hot Fuzz, which was one of his cop show, if you put every single scene in without edits, it was 300 minutes or something like that. You know what I mean? So like if you don't find the last possible minute to put the scene in, when is it the best point to cut? It's boring. I mean, that's a great movie, Hot Fuzz or Hot Fuzz.
The guy with the guy from Shaun of the Dead, right?
Shaun of the Dead, exactly. Yeah. What's his name? Simon Pegg.
Simon Pegg. Yep.
Yeah, Simon Pegg. If you don't find the right moment to start the scene, it's going to be boring and long. But if you find that right moment, it's a great fun romp that's less than 2 hours long. And screenplay writing will show you when to do that.
Yeah. It's all about brevity. I mean, like doing
brevity,
microfiction.
That's my word of fiction, basically.
Yep. I mean, like, there's sometimes when you're writing a novel, you expect to have words in there, but imagine, like, and people are like, but I like taking all this time for description. I'm like, but imagine how much more story you could fit in there instead of putting so much focus on description. You're talking about action and story and the development of the characters.
The problem with novels is, though, you try to get to that word count. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, I wrote 300,000 words and this is my novel. And it's like, oh, dude, I have so many words. Now what? When I write a drabble, I know I'm aiming for 100 words, and it's so much easier to go, okay, my story has to be 100 words. My novel's 50,000 words. You know what I mean? And I don't know when it's going to end. And that's just the problem. My short story, I love when you put a 3,000 word cap on it, because I know I'm aiming for 3,000 words and I can't go over it, or 5,000 words, or whatever the story is going to be. I know that there's an end to it. But my novel, 50,000 words, and it's not done yet. That's a problem. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no brevity there because there's no limit. I can go as long as I want.
Yeah.
This chapter does not have to stop. I can keep going. I can put whatever description I want. I can put a mustache on a bartender. Why? Because there's no stopping.
I think that's what for me is interesting about Vivs, in that it started off. I started writing the novel as a short story based off of a prompt that I had come up with. Write a story based in the 1980s, and so in our previous chat we kind of went over some of the background on that. But my major thing was that I was thinking of it as a short story as I started at the beginning. Yeah, podcast number 2. With the McMuffins. But I started
that turned into MacGuffins.
Yeah, I started writing it thinking, okay, this is going to be a 5,000 word story, and so like the opening of the story, really had a very terse kind of timber to it. And then I started writing more, and then I said, well, maybe this will be an 8,000 word story, and then I wrote some more, and I'm like, well, I'm thinking maybe this is going to be a 10,000 word story. And then once I started hitting, I got over 10,000 words. I go, you know what? This is probably going to be like over 20,000 words. And looking back at my earlier drafts on that, like I really zoomed along in the very first few parts when I thought it was going to be, I had a small number of words to work with, and to the point that when it got over to my third critiquer, she went through there, and Lauren was like, there's like a huge jump here that I can't really buy for the characters. And like I took a look at it, and I like to use the hero's journey, and I kind of said, yeah, you know what? I kind of condensed like these like 4 major steps of the hero's journey into like the first 5 or 4 pages, and then jumped right ahead. And then there's a lot. And as I went more further, and I found times where I really had to spend, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a novel. I'm going to spend more time at this. So like things really chunked up and were very abbreviated in the front. And then like as they got towards the middle, they seemed to feel like they were going slow because like there wasn't enough buildup with the characters and the plot. So she pointed out that rather major flaw, and that's why I got down to writing 6 additional chapters for the book.
And that happened recently too, because you thought you were done.
I thought I had a first draft, and it went through the first couple of critiquers, okay, and it was like, but the novel was only about 70,000 words, because I didn't.
Place for a first-time noveler. That's where you should aim.
Yeah, that's what it was, 70,000. I'm like, well, okay, it's a smaller novel, but I wanted it to be kind of a thin novel. And then
as a first time, I mean, that's what I've heard. That's what one of my latest podcasters, actually, that was H.G. Chambers. He said that's where you should aim, 70 to 90,000. Boom, you're done.
Yep. And by adding the new chapters, the new chapters haven't been finished, and there's some stuff from the later chapters which might be cut or expanded. So it's kind of hard to say where I'm at, but I'm probably more in the 100,000 word range when things are said and done. Still way under, what a practical maximum would be for a first novel. So I generally, from the genre that I'm aiming at, 110,000 would probably be an upper limit. But I don't think I'm going to be anywhere close to that. I think it's probably going to be like between 95 and 100,000.
I'm working on a science fiction piece right now, 100 years in the future, kind of, apocalyptical type of situation. There's some space, blah, blah, blah. My problem is I don't have an ending. So I'm going back in and I'm kind of filling in some details. There's some stuff I want to, character-wise, I want to put in, but I basically feel like I'm more or less done. You know what I mean? I want to be done with it because there's other stuff I have, like 4 or 5 pieces that are, waiting to be finished also. My main problem is just finding the time to flesh this thing out with all these other projects that I'm working on, the short fiction and whatnot. The piece that I have published, though, on the other hand, I didn't follow any kind of hero's journey or whatever. I just felt that when I was writing it, I let my characters do whatever I felt was comfortable. I led them to the end, which I knew what was going to happen. I killed whoever I was going to kill, and then I put the end on it and let some people read it. I would love to get more critiquers, ultimately. I would love to have people read my stuff. I can't do it. I don't know how to make, that happen. That's my biggest problem as a writer, is finding those people to say, sure, I'll invest, several weeks reading your novel. So now how do I make that happen?
That's a question I don't know if I can really answer, because it's been really me. I've just been seeking to make friendships and be nice to people, and I mean, like,
that's the problem. I don't know how to be nice to people.
I don't think that's true, Brian. I mean, one of the guiding principles of life should be, don't be an asshole. And if
Wheaton says don't be a dick, so
it's just different language. But like, for me, it's just, I mean, writers have to remember that the writing world is a small world. If we look back at these legendary guys like Howard and Lovecraft, back in the day, they were poor. They didn't have any money. All these guys that we celebrate and worship their creations today as wonderful ground springs of our culture, that have had great influences. These guys were just shooting letters back and forth to one another. They, at the time, they didn't think of themselves as being, great or grand. They were just guys that liked to write stories, and they would network and help each other out, because somehow, God darn it, they had to weather the storms of life. And how poor old Lovecraft, he was just eating beans raw out of a can. And he never had any money or I mean, he was only able to support himself off of some inheritance, which was almost completely used up by the time he died. And
what's interesting to me, his stuff is public domain now, isn't it? And
yes.
Howard's stuff is still owned by somebody.
Well, a lot of Howard's stuff is in the public domain.
It is.
Some of the rights to some of his Conan stories are actually there's a few that things are disputed, but there are certain things that are copyrighted and trademarked. But
Conan's owned, right? By movie studios and Marvel.
So like using the word Conan like in the cover, but you could do something. I mean, it's public domain. Like the like Red Nails is public domain, I believe. So if you wanted to take the short story public domain with Conan and Valeria and the setting and everything, you could do whatever you want with that. It is public domain. The copyright it's pre the copyright extension, so it falls in the public domain.
Could I use the god Chrome if I wanted to?
Crom, yeah, you could, insofar as he is represented in the public domain stories. You could use those are all in the. There's a vast majority of Howard's work is in the public domain. There are a few that. There's a few things that, but then you're getting into issues of trademark over copyright. Like, for example, the Conan is a trademarked kind of a thing, but as far as the stories are concerned, those are public domain. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a copyright lawyer, so I couldn't really tell you succinctly what is and isn't, but a little bit of search will find that most of those stories are public domain. And the reason why I'm speaking with this on authority is that later on this year on the Fantasy Writers Group, I've got a challenge.
I've got my eye on it.
Yeah, a tribute to the Howards, where write a short story with elements of H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard's stories and mix them together. So I'm working on an actual submission for that one. So as part of that, as part of that, I went down and I looked up exactly what is this fan fiction or is this using public domain material? And for the most part, HP stuff, when he died, he said, look, anybody can have it. I don't think anybody HP, nobody was interested in his estate. And as far as the stories, he just asked a good friend of his to, please take care of my work, but anybody can use it and you can do whatever you want with it, because I'm not going to care because I'm dead. And everybody who was friends with Lovecraft, basically, they published his stuff prosumingly, and
so cool, man.
And now he's got much more of an influence on the genre than Howard did. Even so, like the roles are kind of reversed. Conan.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I loved Conan growing up. Honestly, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie with the Conan the Destroyer was one of my favorite movies growing up.
Yep.
I love that one more than Conan the Barbarian. I didn't even watch Conan the Barbarian. My dad recorded the worst movies in the 1980s. We went to Germany because he got stationed over there. Every single bad movie of the 1980s he brought with us. And then finally I discovered Conan the Barbarian. You know, I realized how much of a better film it was when I was much older. But, you know, I loved Conan. He was like my favorite. But the idea of Lovecraft as an adult is like total. I'm not even that familiar with it. I just want to like delve into it. I am so looking forward to that writing challenge.
Yeah. Have you what stories of Lovecraft have you actually read?
I took a literature of the occult class in college, which doesn't really mean much. I took it twice. The first time I forgot to withdraw from it and failed it. And the second time I passed it just barely, which means, like I said, nothing, because I don't remember reading any of the stories at all. So I have read almost nothing.
You should get on there and start looking up some of those stories. Now, I was in the same boat as you up until about 4 or 5 years ago. I was familiar with Lovecraft's works through the kind of cultural knowledge that spread out about them.
Yeah, that's where I'm at now with the cultural knowledge, basically being, you know, inundated with the idea of Lovecraft, the Cthulhu, and things like that. Just, you know, basically the zeitgeist is there, and I'm looking at it going, oh, this seems so cool.
Yep, exactly. And then I said, you know what? One day I said, I got for a Christmas present a whole collected works, big, thick collected works of the best of Lovecraft. And it was all his very all these most popular stories, and and of course he was mostly short story author. He only wrote one real novel. And
you know what it was though? I did read a few of them, and it just seemed like they were very framed. You know, they'd start out with somebody telling you a story of somebody else, and then they would pick up a letter, and in that story, that frame story, or there would be a letter being read by somebody, and in that letter they'd be telling you a story of somebody else, and that person within that letter or that story they were telling went crazy, and and there'd be some kind of monster or something along those lines, and it was not the best literature on the face of the planet. They weren't the best stories, but I enjoyed the aspects, I guess, that they were trying to tell.
Some of it, I mean, like the Call of Cthulhu, which is lauded a lot. If you read it, it's not the best of his works. Like some of my personal favorite is At the Mountain of Madness. That's one of my favorite of his works. But like also like Shadows over Innsmouth is really good. Dreams in the Witch House. There's a lot that I really enjoy, but they. Even the case of Charles Dexter Ward, which is his only novel, is that one's very kind of drawn out, and it's kind of like a low building gothic kind of horror, you know, and that's very indicative of his influences. But it's his concepts that are just so alien and bizarre, wrapped up in this really old prose. But he also did the first person perspective, like it's a recantation, like you're reading a letter or a journal or something.
Exactly.
He did that.
Not his fiction necessarily, it's what his fiction includes.
His mode, I think actually that mode works really well for the slow building horror that he is well known for. And he puts you in a very, because when it's first person, you can only experience things through that one person's perspective. I think experiencing something like the Cthulhu mythos through a third person narrative would be very different than than the work that it would have a definite different feel. And people have done that absolutely with different POVs with his mythos. Don't get me wrong. But like with a Lovecraft story, he really worked in to get that, like you're seeing it right through the eyes of the person, mistakes and all that they might make. And so that adds and that's a typical, and it's almost like a formula, you could say, like in his stories, like, oh, here comes another one, and he's slowly going to go insane or realize some horrible truth or
this is going to be a very tough writing. That's going to be a very tough writing challenge.
Well, I'm not demanding that people write it in the style of, just use elements of.
Okay.
So just in the same way, and this is hearkening back to Robert E. Howard, where he took aspects of Lovecraftian mythos and work them into the Conan stories, where some of the dark gods and creatures that would pop up in there would pay homage to and have elements of that Lovecraftian horror in them, even though it was sword and sorcery, and Conan would overcome it. It's such a touch to the Conan series that it's kind of indelible that it needs to be put in there. So for me, I've loved these two authors, and it's great that they have this kind of meta connection with one another. And I both enjoy their works for very different reasons. So I thought that putting a challenge where somebody could, take elements on that. So I've got a pretty good idea that I'm gonna put together for that, and I hope some folks enjoy it. It'll be my first piece written in I've touched on things that are semi-Lovecraftian, but as you know, I'm not really a horror writer per se. If I have a monster, it's usually to make people sympathetic with them. But
well, it's very true. You do write from that perspective, don't you? Even Vivian's Last Cigarette kind of takes the point of view of the monster.
Exactly, and the idea of being a monster, like Vivian comes up in the story. It's like, yeah, but I'm a monster, and Gronk is like, no, we're not monsters. And it's that clash of ideas. Like, she thinks of herself like, I look like a monster, I feel like a monster, I'm a monster, and Gronk's like even scarier than she is, and he's like, no, we're not monsters. And that's a theme from page 1 or all the way to the end of the book.
How are you doing? You going to be done soon, or?
I'm going to be done with the new chapters. I'm taking some time off today to do this interview with you, and I finished a couple of short stories that needed some editing work this morning before our talk here. And tomorrow I plan to sit down, crank up the music, get the Misfits going, get some Sex Pistols going, just get some punk vibe going in my blood, and do some writing on that. Try to finish up the chapter 6, and once chapter 6 is done, that's the last of the new chapters going in there. I'm really proud of these new chapters. I altered the ending of the first chapter to take it in a really radical, different direction, and I think it opens up the book with a lot more action, and I think it gets the antagonists more firmly set in the reader's mind. In the original first, up to the second draft, the antagonists kind of appear right in the first chapter, and then they're gone right until the very end of the second act. So there's a big gap there where they really don't quite stay consistent in the reader's radar. So in the new version, the antagonists show up a bit more. The antagonist being a anti-changeling skinhead gang called the Hammer Fists.
That's new.
And not new. They've been there since the first draft. The book actually opens up with Viv walking into town, and she decides these Hammer Fists corner some poor guy, and they're about to curb stomp him, and she steps in, and it's that choice that's the opening moment, her opening choice, that sets her down this path of the story, because it turns out
nothing more visceral to me than curb stomping.
Yes,
it's that movie with what's his face, that white power movie. Just
yep, yeah. the main antagonist, the villain of the story, is a young man by the name of Adam Pelletier, and he's right there, chapter number 1, with a baseball bat, and he's ready to smash Gronk's head in. And Gronk is pacifist. He doesn't want to hurt anybody, even though he's this 350-pound orc who's 6'8". And they've got him tackled, and his other cronies got him pinned down, and it's like Gronk doesn't want to hurt anybody. He's just trying to escape, and they've got him at his mercy. And this skinhead's going to bash in this orc's head for spreading his disease around in the daylight. And who steps up behind him and pulls that bat right out of his hands? Well, it's Vivian. And she takes him and she slaps him right down on the head of his car, and puts her boot right into the crotch of another skinhead and drops him like a and so she ends up helping out Gronk, and then she's completely pissed off because he's a fucking 350-pound orc. There's like no reason for him to not rip their arms out of their sockets like Chewbacca. But from there on, the story takes off because the cops are showing up, and she has reasons not to want to deal with the police, and she goes hiding in a place where she shouldn't be hiding, and Gronk is like really excited to meet another orc, and so on and so forth. But these new chapters, you know, they go through some misadventures, and then they get to all the other stuff that I had already written, and I think it really puts a spotlight on those two characters and gets people really to get to know them. And then the Hammerfists show up in a much bigger way in chapters 5 and 6, and really cement into people's minds as to what's happening. So, and to go back to critiquing partners, thank you, Lauren. That was, if she hadn't pointed out that, you know, there's like some real problems narratively that need to be addressed, if she wasn't, and I was really resistant to what she was saying on that, and she stuck by her guns, and you know what, she was right. I really did need to add 6 more chapters in there to open the book, and now I'm really happy with those chapters.
Does Lauren write?
Yes, Lauren L. Garcia, and she is a published author. She has her first book out, Catalyst Moon, which is published by Inkit. You can get it right on Amazon. And if you wanted to get in touch with her for like to do an interview, I'm sure she'd love to speak.
Okay, that'd be wonderful. Let me do me a favor. You know, you messed up, man. You were incredibly a joy to talk to for the second time, so I will be inviting you back a third time. If you don't want to be invited back, stop being a joy to talk to. Okay, next time just be a drag, be boring, and I'll stop inviting you. So, you know, look forward to another invitation in a few months. And also, do me a favor, send me some pictures of Portcon, send me some links to the authors that you talked about. I'll definitely invite both of them.
Sure.
To be on the podcast so I can have conversations about their work and get some links out there. If you could think of anything else that you want to mention before we sum it up, be more than welcome to.
Yeah. How about before we go off here, if you look at your Twitter, even though I haven't publicly shared the final cover yet, if you go and check out your Twitter right now, I'm going to send you a picture of the cover, and maybe how about live, you give me your thoughts.
Okay.
You should have it now.
Oh, okay. I love this. It's really nice. Is this going to be the actual cover itself?
This is the actual cover that you're seeing.
And this is Vivian.
Yep.
Very interested. I like this a lot.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. That's done by an artist by the name of Christine Larson.
Send me information on her too, because I really like this a lot. Does she have other work as well?
Oh yeah, she's a professional. She's done tons of work, comic book wise.
Oh God, I love this a lot.
Yeah, isn't that awesome? And I just pretty much I gave her some very as advice to any authors listening on here, when you're dealing with somebody who really knows their stuff when it comes to doing artwork, and they have lots of experience of design, try to just give them some general guidelines as to what you want, and let them be as creative as they can get with it. And then once they create stuff, then work through the drafts, because that's what I did with Christine here, and I could not be happier with the end result that she gave me for.
Can I put this in the graphic?
I would actually ask that you would not, because this I haven't done the reveal of the cover yet, so that's just special for you, Brian. Okay. But I will be when I release the book. I'll be putting the cover public. Okay. But right now, I just want this is a tease for you.
Okay. I think if your listeners are going to be quite upset with you for teasing me with something they can't see.
If your listeners make a big enough demand, if they go to my website and they contact me, and they let me know, if I get enough blowback that they want to see the cover released before I have a release date for the book, because I don't want to disappoint anybody, just send them my way. If I get enough complaints, I will say, all right, already, I'll release it.
You misunderstand, Mr. Abbott. These are your listeners. They've always been your listeners. Like you sent them all to my YouTube channel last time we spoke. They want to hear you talk, not me.
I don't believe that for a second.
They're all about you, my friend. You sent them all to listen to you. And like I said, it has been a joy. You have a wonderful way of you about you, and I enjoyed listening to everything you had to say. And we're definitely going to do this again. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brian. I look forward to talking to you again. You take care. You have a great day.
Hey, you too, man. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And that was Jason Abbott, Portland, Maine's finest fantasy author. If you don't know him today, you'll know him eventually. And coming up, I have a Australian author, Asif Mir. Did I butcher his name? I will find out, and so will you. BrianAyellow.com is my website. Follow me on Twitter, Brianayellow, BYRAIELLO. Oh, I have one other thing in the works as well. I'm working with another fantasy author by the name of R. Emma Hardcastle. She's a genius. Check out her website. Google her. She follows me on Twitter. She has agreed to work with me on a podcast called Mirage, the Art of Speculative Fiction. We'll be putting out a episode occasionally. Follow me on Twitter for details. We're going to be working on specific authors and detailing, what specifics make up their particular genre, and learning as we go along, and broadening our topics and seeing what happens. She does a podcast of her own on YouTube called White Room. We'll see what happens. I'll let you know. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And until I speak to you again, thanks so much. Bye-bye.